Good morning, everyone. My name is Shannon Herman, and I am on the committee for the TechWomen Power Breakfast. I'm also the co-chair for the New Hampshire Tech Alliance TechWomen TechGirls initiative. And by day, I'm a senior recruiting manager for Alexander Technology Group. I'm going to share my screen and go over just a couple slides, and then I'll introduce today's presentation by Joanna Young. So again, that's me, Shannon Herman. If we're not already connected, please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I love having the opportunity to know a lot of people in the local market. So feel free to connect with me. Oh, sorry. So the Power Breakfast series, if you're not familiar with it, thank you for joining us. We run on a monthly basis, and we use this opportunity to bring together women in the technology space and those who support women in the technology space. All of this is only possible from an outstanding committee. We've been working together for over 5 years to help bring programming to the local area, and specifically this TechWomen Power Breakfast. The breakfasts are all sponsor driven. So I do want to highlight some opportunities for your company to sponsor. What are really the benefits of sponsorship? Well, you get the opportunity to speak at the event, be able to introduce your company, what you're doing in the local market, and how you're supporting the TechWomen community. You have the opportunity for your company to be included on all press releases and help build some brand recognition. And lastly, you're highlighting your company's commitment to support women and girls in technology. If there's any questions regarding sponsorship, you can certainly speak to anyone at the Alliance, but myself, Shannon, or any of our great committee members would be happy to talk to you as well. Now I have the opportunity to introduce our speaker, Joanna Young. She's an executive digital advisor. She has some pretty amazing highlights when I checked her out on her LinkedIn. So experienced CIO, CFO, strategist, workforce expert, blogger, executive consultant, where she helps organizations and individuals who are at the intersection of talent, process, and technology. She's going to be discussing what hyper-acceleration means, real-time strategies for organizations, and coping skills for technology professionals. Joanna, thank you very much for joining us today, and I'll have you come up on stage now.
Good morning. It's so great to be here. Thanks for that great introduction, Shannon, and thank you, New Hampshire Tech Alliance, for having me. So I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to get going here. So, we're all used to Zoom and everything else right now. Just give me a second to get this going. All right. So, hyperacceleration and barrier conditions. First of all, I want to give you a little bit of context. So there's a movie that came out in 1957. It was called Desk Set, and it was starring Katherine, Hepburn, and Spencer Tracy, who are here on the screen. And the movie was about a big company in New York. The CEO hires a consultant, Spencer Tracy's character, to implement a huge computer, you may be able to see it in the background of this shot, in their reference department. And so the consultant comes in, nobody knows what he's doing. The people in the department aren't consulted about what would be helpful. Everybody is stressed out. There's a lot of misunderstandings. The implementation goes really poorly. The computer gives everybody pink slips on the first day that it's in operation. So that was, in 1957. And really, has a lot of that changed in terms of technology implementation. So I'm going to talk about, things that we're still doing wrong 60 plus years later, but how those things that we're doing wrong have an outsized impact on our ability as individuals and teams and organizations to get the things done that are so important right now. So, and by the way, it's a really kind of funny, interesting movie. So if you get a chance to watch it, I do recommend it. So first of all, let's define some things. What is hyperacceleration? Well, first of all, let me just explain. You'll notice I have this little banner at the bottom with the little orange corona. So all the things that I'm talking about in this presentation, they really existed before this year, before we had a pandemic, but they're all exacerbated now, and we really need to be thinking harder about them and working harder on them. So hyperacceleration, quite simply, is the fact that everything is moving faster, faster. So it's not just speeding up on like an even curve. It's almost like in a hockey stick trajectory. In the 1950s, when desk set was made, the average lifespan of a Fortune 100 or 500 company was about 60 years. Now the average lifespan of a company in the Fortune 500 is about 20 years, and some estimate that that's actually less now. The pandemic has accelerated all kinds of trends. And by some estimates, some industries and ways of working have leapt ahead 10 years. Now that sounds really exciting, but it's also really hard. It's hard for people to adapt and change, and for companies to sort of figure out what this means in the context of their products and their services and where they are in the market. So really, hyperacceleration was a pre-existing condition, but now it's even more important to understand it and deal with it than before. So why do we even care about hyperacceleration? Well, the main thing and the main drumbeat of my presentation is really need to focus more on their talent and investing more in their talent. Because things are moving faster, we all as individuals and teams and organizations require new and different skill sets all the time. And are companies really investing enough in their employees to enable them to acquire all these different skills and ways of working? I think there's some lies that we tell ourselves as individuals, and particularly as leaders. Work smarter, fail faster, lean in. And things like this, maybe they can help with, being thought-provoking and maybe helping people think a little bit differently. But at the end of the day, if we're not coaching people, if we're not educating people to deal with these, different technologies and different ways of working all the time, we're not going to get any better, and, we're not going to do well in the marketplace. So we need to really care about this, and we really need to care about our employees in this context. Okay, so what are barrier conditions? Barrier conditions, quite simply put, is stuff in the organization that is making it super hard to get things done. Outdated processes, legacy technology, again, people not being educated enough, so maybe not having the right skill sets. If we don't address these things, these barriers have an outsized impact. So again, in the context of the pandemic, things that were going well and working well, they're probably having an outsized positive impact right now, for the most part. But things that weren't going well, these barrier conditions, they're now having an outsized negative impact and making it even harder to get stuff done. So, barrier conditions are really important to, recognize and be real about. So why do we care about barrier conditions? Well, for the simple reason is that if you don't know about them and if you don't deal with them, they're, again, going to have that outsized impact on people's ability to get stuff done. Remember back in the spring when, we couldn't get enough testing done, and arguably still can't get enough testing done because there was a shortage of cotton swabs? I mean, I hope someone went back and did like a root cause analysis of why the heck in the United States, we couldn't get enough cotton swabs. And the point here is that barrier conditions are often not about technology and can't be solved by technology in and of itself. Let's take, the technology we're using today, Remo, and the technology that I'm sure we're all using day to day, Zoom, WebEx, or what have you. Those technologies in and of themselves are not making collaboration any better or meetings any better. They're just technology. They need to be implemented and used, and people need to be educated on how to use them so that they can be effective. So we really need to care about barrier conditions. So let's talk about, the current state that we find ourselves in. Okay, so talent, again, the drumbeat. Underinvestment in education of talent leads to underperformance. I have this really sort of sad anecdote. A company that I recently worked with was only spending about $200 per employee per year on training. I mean, that's way south of 1% of probably the average salary. I mean, if you think about somebody who's only making minimum wage, that salary in New Hampshire would be, I think, about $15,000 or $16,000 a year. So only spending a couple $100, even on someone that's making, minimum wage, is, rock bottom, not enough investment. So it's really important that companies are investing more in talent. If people want to talk afterwards, I'd be really interested in hearing about how many people have gone through a lot of reorganizations in, say, the past 5 or 10 years. But in those reorganizations, how many of them resulted in larger training budgets or a larger training department or stronger partnerships with companies to provide education? We spend a lot of time on reorganizing. Maybe we should be spending more time on training people. All right, technology churn. We've all heard the horrible stories. Near where I live, it's sad to have the empty Toys R Us building. A lot of these companies that went out of business just could not adapt their technology. They could not keep up. And again, with HyperAcceleration, the faster, moving faster, the technology change is so much greater. When I started my career, systems would only have to change like once every 8, 9, 10, 12 years. Now you have to change things, all the time. Think about, our cell phones. How often are we updating applications on our cell phones? I probably have to, update like more than 50 of the applications on my mobile phone a week. So, legacy technology in companies, again, has an outsized negative impact. All these old systems, people still having a lot of stuff on premise that needs to have, physical intervention to keep working. This stuff is not good. One of the important things that I tell clients a lot is that they'll say, oh, well, we want to spend $100,000 to replace blah, blah, blah. And I'll say, okay, so what's in the $100,000 that you think you need to spend? And they'll be like, oh, well, that's, the cost of, the system or the hardware or whatever that we need to buy. And I'll be like, well, you know what? $100,000 is way understated. Really, when you look at the cost of a piece of software or hardware, let's say it's $100,000, it's really going to cost you probably closer to $300,000 or $400,000 to implement, because the actual technology cost tends to only be somewhere between 30 to 50% of the total cost of implementing something. Most of the cost of implementing something is in the effort it needs either internally or through partners to configure, to integrate with other technology, to communicate and train, and to actually do the mechanics of deployment. Even if stuff is in the cloud, all of these things apply. So companies are, in general, greatly underestimating what it takes to implement things. And that leads to a lot of churn. All right, so debt. Debt is not just what's on the balance sheet anymore. I've already mentioned some things. Talent debt. Okay, if you're not training people enough, you've got talent debt. Process debt. Every time you hear someone say, well, that's the way we've always done it, that's a giant red flag that you've got process debt. Things being done the same way as they did, 10 years ago is awful. Really need to be looking at processes all the time to make sure that they're still usable and applicable. Technology debt, as we said, in fact, I've even heard some people talk about how technology debt actually should be reflected on the financial documentation of companies. because in particular, shareholders should understand how much technology debt a company has. And then governance debt. This really factors in terms of leadership. If leadership is spending too much time having people manage up to them, like, all these status meetings on projects for leadership, or, planning meetings or what have you, leaders should be spending time supporting outwards and downwards. They should be waking up every day saying, what do I need to be doing today to support the people in my teams so that they can be having a better experience, be more engaged, and have the skill sets and the tools they need to be successful. That's where they should be spending the majority of their time, not on sending emails requesting meetings about the status of a project. We need to be thinking about people, people over money. So when companies are thinking about debt, they need to be thinking about way more than money. Self-inflicted disruption. A lot of our issues come from within. The companies that tended to do okay in the chaos that was, March 2020, are companies that had already had business continuity plans and had exercised them, had done disaster recovery exercises. I remember myself, rolling my eyes at, oh my gosh, I have to spend this time on my business continuity plan and doing a tabletop exercise and, thinking what would happen. I can remember to this day at Liberty Mutual, and I think we might have some present or former Liberty Mutual folks on the phone, doing a tabletop exercise around a pandemic. I am so glad that I had that experience, because I can tell you it served me well in March in terms of helping and working with my clients. And, companies who did this, a very basic thing, it's been around for years, they did a lot better, and their employees did better back in the chaos that was the, late winter and early spring. So, ignore these basics at your peril. I mean, we decide not to do these things. We don't educate people on these things, and it's self-inflicted within companies. Okay, so what do we do about all this stuff? So first of all, you have to know your barrier conditions. So here's a little exercise that I encourage you to take away today. Think about all the stuff that is really hard right now in your work, and pick something that's at the intersection of it's hard, but it's something that you can maybe easily fix, either yourself or maybe with only the help of one or two colleagues, or a little bit of help from your manager or leader, and do something about it. Fix that, just that one thing. And then once you fix that, then try to create some energy about going on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. It may be something simple about the way you're running Zoom meetings, or a couple of people were giving me ideas before this meeting, having, virtual happy hours to, help with, collaboration. Pick something simple that can solve something difficult for you, and try to create a little bit of a flywheel effect. Like, okay, we did this together, we fixed something, now can we go on to the next thing? But you have to know your barrier conditions, and you have to prioritize them. If there are 100 things that are difficult in your organization, you can't fix those 100 at one time. You need to fix them one at a time. Okay, putting people ahead of money. All right, let's talk about some examples here. So companies that put people before money tend to do well. And this can manifest itself in a few different ways. And I'll be honest with you, some of them may not always be perceived as great, but generally over time, people who truly care about people, their employees, their customers, tend to do well. Because let's face it, people buy products. Money doesn't buy products. Money is just the tool with which to buy the products and services. So, let's take, for example, how many times I've driven by the Dunkin' Donuts near me and seen the long lines of cars waiting to buy coffee. Why is that? Because Dunkin' Donuts, perceived by many people to have a great product, the coffee. How many of us have seen the photos of people camping out overnight to buy the latest iPhone, right? a company with a great product that people want to buy is going to be ahead of the game. Another example is companies who create a great experience. Amazon is by far and away probably the most used example of this, because the experience is frictionless. It's so easy. It's like, oh, I need shampoo. Click. The shampoo shows up a couple days later. They've made it so easy and frictionless. These companies put the customer and the thought about the customer ahead of money in many cases. But you don't have to be big like Apple or Dunkin' Donuts or Amazon. You can be really small. I have to tell you, I have heard so many amazing stories, and we could probably do, Josh and Shannon, we could probably do a whole breakfast on amazing stories of small companies in New Hampshire that had to adapt and did adapt overnight to create a frictionless digital experience. The small family-owned restaurants, the retailers, the downtown retailers that you could order stuff online and that you could pick it up from them. I got to tell you, my hat goes off to those small businesses who adapted quickly. And I, for one, and I'm just going to put a little plug in here, we all need to be supporting these small retailers in our communities. We have Takeout Tuesday. I am trying to buy as much as possible from small local real retailers as opposed to big box. Yes, I do. I'm an Amazon customer, but I'm also supporting small retail as well. So that's my plug for them, because that's my little way of putting local people before money. Okay, next thing, talent formula. Continuous process improvement. I'm sure there's folks in the audience who have heard of Lean Six Sigma. That was a way of looking at processes and streamlining them and making them lean. I think we need to refocus and have continuous people improvement. Again, we need to be investing in our people, making sure that our investment manages our spend on people. Typically, companies are spending between 40 to 80% of their operational budget on people-related expenses, salaries, benefits. Right now, sending people stand-up desks for their houses. If they're spending that much on people-related expenses, they sure as heck need to be making sure that they're getting the best value out of that money, and that's by investing in improving people and their skill set. Those of you who might follow me on social media know that one of my favorite hashtags is true leadership. True leadership is putting others before yourself, and I think we need to see more of that. That's something that needs to be going faster, having leaders care more about others than themselves. We need to accelerate people-centricity, frictionless customer and employee experience. Did you know it only takes about 10 to 15 seconds? If people can't find what they're looking for on a website or an application, they start to opt out. Now, opting out for customers might be, I can't deal with this. I can't find what I'm the product and service I'm looking for. I'm going to another company, another website. Or opting out can take the form of, oh my gosh, I'm an internal employee. I have to do this, but this is so painful. It's taking me more time than I need to. And that, that's wasted time. And, it hurts employee engagement and it hurts employee productivity. So think about this 10 to 15 second rule. Take a good hard look at your processes, your technology, the experience that you're trying to put out there for your customers. Do a little test. And if it takes someone more than 10 to 15 seconds to find what they're looking for, that's probably a sign that you need to be a little more people-centric. We need to stop planning and start doing. Planning is like a root canal. You want to spend as little money and as little time as possible getting that done. The goal should be spending zero time planning. You're not going to get to zero, but that should always be your goal, because at the end of the day, planning has no value without the doing and the delivery. If you're spending a lot of time in meetings having to do with planning, especially resource planning, like you're dividing up people between projects, trying to figure out how to get stuff done, that is a giant red flag that the organization and the leaders don't understand the priorities or haven't communicated them effectively, and they don't really understand the capacity and the capability of the organization. Now, you have to do some planning, but you certainly shouldn't be doing too much of it. I once heard this horrible anecdote about a leader that said, well, I know the capacity of my organization is only around doing about 50 projects a year, but I give them 100 to do because that way I know I'll get, more than 50. I'll get like 60 or 70. And I was like, first of all, insulting. And second of all, maybe you're getting those 60 or 70 projects, but I bet you're exhausting people. They're not of the quality they should be. And there were all kinds of problems and churn and issues after the fact that created rework. Wouldn't you rather have 50 projects that are great and amazing and valuable than 60 or 70 that result in exhausted employees and a lot of quality issues? So, that I thought was, that anecdote was just terrible, I thought. So stop planning and start doing. There's this concept, let's talk about, minimum viable stuff. There's this concept called the Hawthorne Effect, which basically says that people who are watched at work will perform better. Maybe that was true back in like the dark industrial age, but it's certainly not true now. I call BS on that. People perform well when they understand what the priorities are. They understand how the delivery against those priorities is going to be measured in terms of revenue, products sold, employee engagement, whatever the case may be. And they understand their individual role in achieving that. If people understand those things and they're communicated early and often and effectively, and again, the drumbeat, they're educated in the skill sets they need to achieve that, then they will be okay and they will be engaged. So we need to update this Hawthorne Effect concept and be more transparent about the priorities and the measures of success. Okay, so the punchline, the result. So we all now understand that time in the Fortune 500 is getting shorter and shorter. And the punchline here really is one of the big things that translates to is that relevance time is getting shorter and shorter. The relevance of skills, the relevance of products, the relevance of services, the relevance of the ways in which we work. Those are all getting shorter, and that is super scary, wicked scary. And so we really need to, in my opinion, deploy a lot of the things that I've talked about today to create really this flywheel that we can go faster, but faster without people flying out the windows of the organization, being stressed out and overworked. We need to create this flywheel of valuing people more, getting rid of technology debt, understanding the value that the organization needs to provide to, company goals and priorities, valuing customers more, being more centric, being more people-centric, both on the customer and the employee side, to drive the business results. And that good business results, more revenue, more profit needs to be driven back into this flywheel. And really with hyper-acceleration and the world we live in today, we don't have a lot of choice, in my opinion, about doing these things. So thank you so much for listening about hyper-acceleration and barrier conditions and me saying over and over again how we need to invest more money in the skill sets of our employees. And now I am ready for questions. So I can see some folks have some questions.
Yeah, and Joanna
is coming back online.
Yeah, I'll hop in here just to make it a little easier on you. I'll ask the questions out of the Q&A and we can delete them out so you don't have to worry about reading them at the same time. Okay. But thank you so much for your presentation. I really loved the, kind of the way you wrapped it up with the people-centric environment. You need to really, if you engage and train at the employee level, the corporate goals will happen versus when you're looking at it from the top down. So thank you for sharing that. I really appreciated it.
Oh, you're welcome.
Looks like the first, and just so everyone knows, there's a specific feature in the chat where it says chat, participants, and then Q&A. So if we can add questions into the Q&A, but it looks like we have one from Larry saying, what specifically needs to be done to have dollars added to the budget for people improvement?
Okay, so this is a great question. Thank you, Larry. So as a recovering CIO and CFO, this can be really hard to do. And I think what it takes is being able to show leaders the value, the quantitative value of doing that, saying by every additional dollar you invest in education and training for people, and including allowing them the time to take the training and education, the results that can have. And there are certain formulas and approaches you can use for this, but regardless of the formulas and the approaches that you use, you need at least one leader, preferably two or more, to sort of buy into this concept and sell the fact that you need to increase your training budget, you need to increase the time allotted to employees for training, and create some interest in that. And don't underestimate the power of boards to do this as well, because boards see how much money is spent on talent. And if a board can understand how additional training dollars, you can get more value out of compensation dollars, there'll be a couple people on the board that will be interested in that.
Thank you. Looks like Susie is asking, are there studies that can be pointed to that show the value of educating/training your employees?
So yes, there are studies, and I'm happy to take this as an after action and give Shannon and Josh the case studies. I'm thinking of some that are out of Salesforce and a couple of other places. I'll mention Salesforce actually specifically here to give at least a partial answer. Salesforce has this whole self-education thing. It's called Trailhead, and they invested in that training both for their own employees and obviously the thousands and thousands of customers they have all over the world, because they realized that providing training and advocating for that training with their customers and providing the actual content and the method to do that was sort of a win-win-win all the way across the board. So that's one example I can absolutely point to that help Salesforce with their products, help their customers with better implementations and employee engagement.
Awesome. Looks like Cheryl is asking, how can individuals influence efforts to overcome governance debt?
Oh, great question. So I can get very fierce on this one. I once told somebody, I have to go to all these meetings and report all the status. I'm like, stop going to the meetings. So that may not work, but that's some days that's how you feel. I think this is where we need to have some courage as individuals. There's that moment, and I hope everybody has it with their managers and leaders, where they ask you like, what can I help you with? Or, what can we be doing better as a company? You need to seize those moments. I think this is my number one advice. Seize those moments and say to them, there's too much managing up. I have to spend too much time worrying about putting together presentations on what I'm doing for, you or the CIO or the CFO, whoever the heck, or the business, whoever the heck it might be. That's taking a lot of my time and energy. And I need, why do we have to do that so much? We have tools like Jira or Confluence or Microsoft Teams or whatever, all these dashboards that can be put together, and you need to come with solutions. You can't just come with the problem. Maybe say, hey, look at this dashboard I created. And this is an example out of real life for me. Here's this dashboard I created in Jira that shows, the executives can do self-service and go in and look at this so that I don't have to spend 4 hours a month putting together a PowerPoint presentation that, let's face it, a lot of executives' eyes glaze over. So you need to seize those moments when you're being asked for feedback, and you need to come ready with the problem and the solution. And you need to engage others. Like, don't be above doing a little covert action, like gathering some of your colleagues who feel the same way together and being, hey, let's all go with the same problem and solution when we're asked for feedback. So, I think you got to be courageous and get out there. And if you're a leader yourself, here's a little exercise for you. Count up the number of hours that are in meetings where you're asking your folks for status or updates or what have you, and really take a hard look as to whether you need to spend all that time.
Excellent. Well, I think that's the last question we had. Joanna, are you going to be sticking around for a little bit at a table to answer some questions if anyone wants to speak directly?
Yeah, absolutely. I will hang around until 9 and answer, tables. If people, just one last thing, if people have questions they want to ask me offline and we don't get a chance to interact today, just send me a message on LinkedIn. I'm easy to find. Send me a connection request. I appreciate in the connection request, please put a note like, oh, saw your presentation at the New Hampshire Tech Alliance. Because connection requests without any context, I don't know about you guys, but it kind of freaks me out sometimes. Like, why is this person wanting to connect with me? And then I have to figure out how they might be connected with me. So a little note with some context would be super appreciated if you're not already connected with me on LinkedIn. Thank you.
Awesome. So if you want to hop onto table 1, and then I've got a couple final slides to wrap us up. Okay. Thank you so much, Joanna. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, everybody.
All right, just a couple things to wrap us up today. We do have our TechWomen annual be virtual. It's scheduled for September 30th, and we'll be sending out final details as far as registration information, hopefully by the end of this week. So stay tuned. I hope you all can join us. We're very excited to be moving the event to a virtual space and be able to celebrate some amazing women who are doing some great things in the technology space here in our state. So stay tuned for that. And lastly, we do have our breakfast scheduled for next month already. It's going to be October 14th. We'll be seeing Jennifer Parent-Young, and she's from Franklin Pierce University, and she'll be talking about the science of mindfulness. So hope you all can make it there. That wraps us up for today. Please